Fear is killing Europe's reason. Europe understands that Moscow and Washington are now leaving it on the sidelines of the negotiation process. Russia and the United States are resolving all issues through bilateral contacts and not just those concerning the Ukrainian crisis. In reality, Putin and Trump are drawing the contours of a system of international relations and security in Europe without the participation of the Europeans themselves. Not long ago, it seemed, and was widely stated, that the primary obstacle to a peaceful settlement in Ukraine was the Kyiv regime. The head of that regime, Volodymyr Zelensky, is doing everything possible to derail the negotiation process, even going so far as to orchestrate terrorist attacks against nuclear power plants and peaceful Russian cities. At the same time, the position of the Ukrainian leadership is entirely pragmatic. They clearly understand that any compromise in Ukraine will come at their expense. That after the cessation of hostilities, the population will demand concrete plans for returning to a normal, peaceful life, plans that do not exist because there will simply be no money to rebuild Ukraine's economy. Finally, they realize that once the war is over, all of Zelensky's repression and corruption will come to light, after which, at best, the current head of the Kyiv regime will find himself in the defendant's seat in court. Thus, the Kyiv regime is deeply invested in prolonging the war for as long as possible. For them, it is a matter of survival. However, just a few years ago, no one could have imagined that today, when the prospects for peace are beginning to emerge in Russian-American negotiations, the main obstacle to diplomacy would not be the Kyiv regime, but the Brussels regime. The European Union, whose authorities, particularly the European Commission and certain national leaders, notably French President Emmanuel Macron, are doing everything possible to disrupt the negotiation process. They are promising barrels of euros and baskets of weapons to Kyiv's reckless leaders, and are even planning to send troops to Ukraine under the guise of peacekeepers, fully aware that this could ignite a major war in Europe. One would think that things should be entirely the opposite. European states should be the most eager to end the war in Ukraine. After all, ending the war would allow them to rid themselves of millions of Ukrainian refugees, eliminate instability on their eastern borders, and stop spending billions of euros propping up Ukraine's corrupt regime. In turn, resolving the Ukrainian issue would grant Europe access to cheap Russian gas, capable of breathing new life into Europe's dying industry, reopen the Russian market, another breath of life for European industry, and, if they are lucky, even establish a collective security system that could provide protection against all possible external threats. However, all these undeniably rational benefits pale in comparison to the three fears gripping Europe, fears that are driving its highly unconstructive, and to some extent even irrational, behavior in the Ukrainian conflict. First, the fear of collapse. The European Commission has invested heavily in the Ukrainian conflict. This is not only about the billions of euros spent, belonging, it should be noted, to national governments, but also about the immense efforts exerted to force national governments to follow a unified party line. The drive to use all EU resources to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia has transformed the European Union from a community of democratic nations into a sect where everyone is subordinate to the will of the leader. And when Russia wins the war in Ukraine, whether through an agreement with the United States or through military means, it will mean that the leader has failed. At that point, the issue will no longer be merely replacing the leader with someone else, but rather the collapse of the entire ideological foundation of the sect. In other words, the dissolution of European integration as such an integration that, through the efforts of European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, has been transformed from a concept of shared economic prosperity into a tool for waging a crusade against the so-called infidels.